This book, our Constitution, protects our society and empowers us to govern. The Protea leaves are us, the people, who freely elect our voices in Parliament. The drum calls the people of Parliament, through whom we govern together. And the sun is our country, healing our past, improving our lives, and energizing our potential. Together, our Constitution, our people, our Parliament, and our country are building our great South African nation. Parliament TV, Channel 408 on DSTV.
Welcome. We are live from Parliament Studios here in Cape Town, and that was the subcommittee on the review of the National Assembly rules, considering matters referred by the Rules Committee. You can continue watching the committee deliberations on all social media platforms at Parliament of RSA. With the legislative power vested within it, Parliament is at the heart of democracy and bears the responsibility to scrutinise and oversee the actions of the executive. This responsibility means that Parliament and its committees must keep abreast of any issues and developments that affect the people. One of the biggest developments that have taken centre stage is the scourge of crime and criminal extortion in the form of protection fees that is suffocating, debilitating and destabilising small businesses and communities throughout the country. On the 3rd of September 2024, the Minister of Police, Mr. Senzo Mchunu, delivered a statement during the National Assembly sitting on South African Police Service's plans to deal with the high levels of extortion in the country. The statement was in response to an increase in the reports of extortion in various business industries throughout the country, resulting in some businesses ceasing their operations. In his statement, the minister said it was shocking that there were increasing reports of church services, funerals and pensioners being targeted. The parliamentary committee that bears the responsibility of overseeing and holding the police department to account is the Portfolio Committee on Police. And this is what the chairperson, Mr. Ian Cameron, had to say during that sitting of the National Assembly on the 3rd of September. Let's take a look.
Extortion is not a new phenomenon in South Africa, but it's now reached a point of crisis. Recent events, such as the closure of Dr. Anele Yako's ophthalmology practice in Mthatha, who was forced to shut down his practice and go into hiding, highlights the destructive impact these crimes have on individuals, their communities, and the essential services that they are meant to provide. Extortion actually acts as an additional illegal tax on an already strained economy, draining businesses of much needed funds. Its spread is fueled by three key factors. The first one is the continued growth of violent, organized armed groups, a perception of legitimacy or an element of fear they cultivate within different communities in South Africa. The inability or unwillingness of state institutions to respond effectively is the third and final factor. A further example is the continued attacks on the Inter-Cape bus service between the Eastern Cape and the Western Cape, including numerous cases of intimidation and violence, even murder, committed by known taxi extortion mafia figures. Attacks, extortion, intimidation of commuter transport systems threaten the livelihoods of millions and must be addressed urgently. Extortion syndicates challenge the very legitimacy of the state. Their demands for local taxes, similar to those seen in regions where gangs or militias have completely taken over the state functions, and they appear especially where state institutions are either weakened or compromised.
And that was Mr. Ian Cameron, the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Police, making inputs on the issue of extortion in the country on the 3rd of September 2024 during a National Assembly sitting. He joins us in studio to further unpack the committee's efforts and commitment to combat extortion. Thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you, Tepo. Thank you for having me.
Now, let's talk about the prevalence of extortion. How prevalent is it within the country?
I think, we sometimes have this impression that it's only with regards to protection fees for certain businesses or something like that, but it's come to a point where it's touching on every single aspect of business and other parts of life in South Africa. Even some schools are threatened to pay some kind of a protection fee. The other day I was speaking to an elderly lady in the Cape Flats in a part of Gugulethu that was saying that some of her neighbours actually have to pay protection fees just for their own parking outside their houses. Little things like, for example, having a satellite TV dish outside your house is something that you would sometimes need to pay for. So it's become absolutely ludicrous, and I think it's because the lack of consequence has grown over time to the point where they see it as an easy way to get quick money, and therefore they engage in even low-level targets like the poorest of the poor. But then we also have businesses, like I mentioned in that specific address to the National Assembly, where you've got businesses like Intercape Bus Service, who has been held hostage by the taxi industry for quite some time. And it's almost as though certain parts of government sometimes have a little bit of additional caution when it comes to something like the taxi industry.
Now, with that, you've just mentioned a few different types of extortions. Let's talk more about that, because we've heard that they manifest differently. I mean, we predominantly know about the protection fee, of course. And what are some of the other types of extortion that we find within our communities? Well,
let's use the transport one that I mentioned as a good example. What happened was that you had certain strong corporate entities that were filling the formal long-haul transport services between the Western Cape and the Eastern Cape. And I call them taxi mafia straight, because certain groups within the taxi industry, and not all of them, certain groups, started saying, but wait a minute, we want access to those routes. And these bus services are basically stopping us from having business there. And instead of saying, how can we have a lawful way of competing, they started shooting at bus drivers, and they started attacking buses. They started holding up the clientele on those buses. And so it really became quite dangerous. What happened after that was they basically held them hostage, that you either had to pay money to use the route or else, and then there's a whole range of violent threats that follow, and action sometimes. And when it started being followed up, now unfortunately the private sector to a large extent stepped in to try and fight this, even took the police to court, the police minister to court, the previous police minister, and it really has become quite a hairy fight. What also then happened was that they would literally go in, for example, Cape Town bus station. And they would say, we're taking control of this office now. And they do it by force. And unfortunately, you've got certain businesses that have continued to sell the tickets of these new illicit bus companies that don't have the permits that they need, that don't have the licensing that they need. And that's just one example of many. I'm just trying to indicate how it's now influencing people that are completely dependent on that form of transport, the dangers that it has for them, but then also you can imagine on a job creation and a job security level how it's actually negatively impacting that and creating a very dangerous kind of new culture within which people need to survive.
Now, Chair, what in your opinion then is the sudden scourge of what happened? It seems like we slept one night and we woke up and we were all just held ransom with the issue of extortion.
Yes, I think, to be blatantly honest, I think in terms of townships specifically, it's been there for a long time, and it's slowly but surely it has increased, but it has been there. But it's almost as though sometimes I feel like a little bit of a cold shoulder was given because it's in the township, it's their problem. And that can never be our approach, because it doesn't matter who's impacted. It is not fair. It's not the right thing. That's not upholding the rule of law. So it has, although, increased. Now, there's an interesting dynamic that fits in with extortion, and that is the trend of kidnapping also increasing. Remember, kidnapping is basically a type of extortion. It's the same principle. You do something to force someone into giving you some kind of, let's say, financial payment of some sort. Now, it's interesting that too has increased with this trend of kidnapping, along with other illicit types of trades. Now, if you look at kidnapping specifically, I believe it's become more of a lucrative business model, and I'm sorry to say it so, almost casually, because it is very serious, but it has become a norm because it's an easy way to get money. And if you look at something like kidnapping, if you get caught and you are actually prosecuted, you might get 5 years in prison, which, I mean, compare that with the cash that you get back compared to robbing a jewelry store, getting caught, doing 15 or more years in prison. The risk is just far less, and therefore I believe criminals know this. I mean, when last did you hear of a cell phone shop being robbed? It doesn't happen much anymore. It doesn't. So I think they are looking at other avenues for quick money. Now, if we know this, the public knows this, we need to hold the relevant authority to account to make sure that they act according to the trend.
Now, of course, in your speech on the 3rd of September during the National Assembly sitting, you mentioned some of the impacts that extortion has, especially on small businesses. Let's unpack that more, and let's discuss what are some of the impacts, not only just on businesses, but on communities at large.
Let's use Mthatha as an example. The Eastern Cape has been literally numbed in some parts by extortion, and I would like to say extortion and kidnapping. It really is a crisis. And the one example I used was a specific ophthalmology practice that actually had to close down because of the threats that they were receiving. Now, that is the difference potentially between life and death eventually, because that means that you can't get medical care if the medical facility doesn't engage in some kind of a criminal activity. And this is horrific, because that means that a very basic right of receiving the relevant medical care is actually denied by a group of criminals. And the interesting part is, and this is where it's important for us to always do introspection, from a government point of view, one needs to go and make sure that you're not developing an environment in which extortion can flourish. Now, if cops' morale generally is quite low, you do have a corruption problem. Your disciplinary process in the police is very slow and often ineffective, unfortunately. All of those things create an environment where it's easier to collude with the rotten apples in the police, and it makes it easier to intimidate and challenge the good ones. And the majority of cops are good. The problem is that you've got these rotten apples that flourish along with these criminal elements on the outside.
A grim picture that the chairperson is painting there for us. And on the 3rd of September 2024, the police minister delivered a statement in the National Assembly on the South African Police's intervention plans to combat extortion. Let's take a look at what the minister had to say.
In the context of above, the whole government approach, we have initiated signing of cooperative agreements with provincial and local governments with operational plans, all seeking to integrate our resources against crime. Currently, the operational plan is being rolled out here in the Western Cape, in Cape Town, with its new 6 sub-districts that are going to make it much more easier for us to police these areas, jointly with city police, with private companies, with law enforcement and CPFs. The model will be replicated in all metros in the country. The operational plan will include CPFs and private security companies, as I've indicated. The Eastern Cape and Nelson Mandela have agreed on the operational plan, and it is currently being rolled out, and we will be launching it soon. We're meeting Gauteng on Thursday this week on the same program. Next will be KZN on the 19th and the 20th of this month. All these metros coincide with the concentration of crimes in the country. And this alignment will help us fight much more effectively in an aligned way in terms of resources. We're also holding a series of meetings with sister departments
on collaboration against crime as per National Integrated Crime Prevention Strategy. This Friday, we're meeting as JCPS cluster to tighten up our act and to come up with better synergies. The deadline for us to complete national policing policy is the end of October this year. This will, among other things, deal with police stations, just the definition of a police station, just the norms and standards of a police station, urban or rural. We need that so that we define what a police station is. And it will relate to infrastructure and application of such norms, including where police live in their barracks and all of that. We believe traditional leaders and communities have a role to play and they will be engaged. And finally, legislation reviews are underway. 1 is SAPS Amendment Bill, 2, CIRA, 3, CSPS Act, 4, Critical Infrastructure Amendment Bill, and 5, overhaul of Criminal Procedure Act by Department of Justice and as police who are participating. And this is important. We have our eye, among other things, on things like parole. We think that quite a large number of criminals get paroles unduly and prematurely in a number of cases, while they still should be sitting in jail. We'll be going through this with the portfolio committee, and we hope that we'll go through this financial year so that we improve the way we deal with criminality in our country.
You are still tuned into Parliament TV, and if you've just joined us, welcome. We are in studio with Mr. Ian Cameron, the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Police, unpacking the issue of extortions that has communities and businesses at ransom. Chair, we've spoken about the impact and the prevalence of extortion in our communities. And let's focus now on the committee's role, the work of the police and collaboration, if possibly, right? Now, apart from the statement that the Minister made on the 3rd of September, of course, himself and the department appeared before the committee. Is the committee satisfied with some of the proposals that the Minister and his department has come up with?
So I think it's important that we actually divide the two. When it comes to the Minister's statement, I think he's really indicated all the correct things. The fact that he openly acknowledges, first of all, that there are challenges is something we haven't seen before, that a Minister actually acknowledges these are the real challenges, and where he openly then says collaboration is key with private sector, with other parts of government, whether local or provincial, and that we must do that. And you would have seen that he has signed a number of cooperative agreements over the last few months in different provinces, and those are all, I believe, steps in the right direction. Look, legislation already indicates that the police must work with all the relevant authorities locally and provincially. But I think symbolically it creates a very strong message that there is movement in terms of collaboration. Now, I think in terms of the next step from the Minister's side is it will be good to see an implementation plan, because it's one thing to say we've got an agreement, but now, I mean, in Cape Town in the last probably 48 to 72 hours, I'm aware of 3 mass shootings. In Mamre about 48 hours ago, 7 out of 10 people that were shot died. Last night in Bishop Lavis, I believe that I think 5 or 6 people were fatally wounded, and in Athlone, another 5 people were brutally killed. Now, it's important for that reason to make sure that the implementation of the actual cooperative agreement is done as soon as possible to ensure that the actual synergy of those operations happen. Now, the second part is the part with the police management.
Yes.
Now, they presented a plan. So the Minister presented what he would like to see. Then the police management came and they presented a plan. And to be brutally honest, we weren't too happy with it, because we felt that it wasn't much of a plan or a strategy. It was a bit of an overview of what could be done. We didn't see any workable outcomes where we could say, okay, if in 3 months we get together again, this is how we will be able to measure the success of the police against extortion. It wasn't all bad. A lot of the stuff that the police indicated was positive, but generally speaking, we didn't see the detail. Now, obviously, we don't expect to see things that could be detrimental or give the police some kind of a strategic disadvantage, but at the same time, we would have liked to see more detail. So we have said to them that we need to return again. From the committee side, we've obviously got quite a few things ahead of us that we're going to be engaging in order to keep the relevant people to account.
Now, with that report that the department gave you, and of course you're talking about tangible results and implementation, which is the important part of this, did they report that they've established any specialized units or task forces to focus on extortion?
So there are task teams. Western Cape's a good example where there's actually been a task team for quite some time, actually, in cooperation with certain local government authorities like the City of Cape Town and also the Western Cape government. We've also seen the establishment of certain extortion hotlines. Now, in the last year, the one in the Western Cape, and I'm mentioning it just because I learned of it recently, it only received 1 call. But now, if you look in other provinces, like in the Eastern Cape or Gauteng, there was definitely an increase in calls and people are reporting it. I think public trust in the police needs to increase for people to actually use those kinds of resources. They are also scared that it would expose them and that they would have to face some kind of a risk that could ultimately mean they need to pay the price of losing their lives or a family member's life if they do speak out to the police. So it's being stuck between a rock and a hard place. But yes, there are initiatives. They've sent, for example, in the Eastern Cape National Intervention Unit and quite a contingent of them. My questioning of it is rather in line of what is the crime intelligence capability to be proactive in stopping these things and really infiltrating these extortion rings, and then also what is the detective capacity to make sure that we are going to be able to present a well-investigated docket to a prosecutor for it to be successful in court. Remember, we need to complete the entire cycle. There's no use arresting someone and they're back out in the street in a day or two.
Of course. Now, you mentioned rotten apples earlier on, and right now you just mentioned how there needs to be an increase in public trust within the police, right? Now, the issue of corrupt individuals within the SAPS is a contentious one, right? On the back of that is the belief that extortion thrives under secrecy. Now, with that, do you think that these elements, they discourage people to go to the police and tell them and report issues of extortion within their communities?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I can give you practical examples. We can look at one of the previous crime intelligence bosses in the Western Cape. Was a major general. He was recently sacked for several things, but it was through an entire board of inquiry that he had to go through. And according to my knowledge, it has still not been signed off, although it was completed months ago. We can look at the fact that recently we questioned it in Parliament as well in the committee. Major General Mboto and the Hawks that's being promoted despite the fact that he helped to cover up an arrest of someone that's on the Interpol red list. The list goes on. There are several of these types of appointments, and then remember, you've got rotten apples in terms of that, but then you also have appointments that aren't in positions because of merit. Now, what the committee has recommended, and this report was adopted on Wednesday in the committee, is that the entire top management of SAPS needs to go through a skills audit, because I want to know, and the committee unanimously agreed that we would like to see whether the management of the South African Police Service and those people in these high positions actually are there because of merit. Remember, we've got a significantly bloated top structure in SAPS. We've got over 600 brigadiers and over 200 generals. Apart from it being massively expensive, I am not convinced at the moment that it is bearing any kind of real fruit. And the perception is often created when we sit in these sessions with the police management. The perception is created that the only reason why there's a struggle is because of a shortage of resources and funding. And that's not the problem. I'm telling you now, and that's why I'm so grateful for the approach of the new Minister of Police along with his deputies. I'm telling you now that one of the biggest crises we have is adequate leadership in the top structure of SAPS.
Now, with that then, is the committee of the view that the low number of police detectives has an impact on ongoing and even potential investigations with regards to extortions? Absolutely.
So if you go look at the annual report that we've gone through in the committee, it indicated that the detective services only reached about 46% of their targets. Now, don't get me wrong, some of these targets are unrealistic. For example, crime intelligence indicates that they reached 100% of their targets, yet we haven't seen any form of real proactive work. So that, that's laughable. I started laughing in the committee, and so did most of the members, and we just said, this is impossible, there's just no way. But then if we go back to detectives seem to have been neglected for quite some time. They don't get any form of additional stipend, overtime. They are very limited in terms of other resources, say, for example, transport, being able to drive and work. Their mental health is in a very, very difficult space at the moment, generally speaking. This is an issue in the police, but I know that in detective services it really is problematic. So there's no doubt about that. Some stations in the country, there are detectives with between 300 and 500 dockets on their tables each. It's physically impossible. There's no way that a human being, no matter how hardworking or how good their intentions, can do a proper investigation with that kind of workload.
Now, with that said, earlier on you spoke about collaboration. Just give us a brief overview of what the committee's standpoint is with the possibility of collaboration between the SAPS and other law enforcement agencies. You have the National Prosecuting Authority, of course, and the Hawks, just to focus on extortion and to combat it.
Yeah, so I think it's a very important question. First of all, something that we have been, and I'm carefully becoming more optimistic about it. We are seeing good success recently, especially with more, let's say, bigger organized crime kind of linked to extortion cases where the MPA, the Hawks, let's say Hawks and SAPS together, are showing success. We are seeing that cases from years back are now coming to fruition. We are seeing that people are appearing in court, high-profile figures too, so that's positive. We would obviously love to see an even more integrated strategy. I think it's important that the prosecutor, for example, and the detective should almost work hand in hand continuously. And this is where something like the Scorpions in the past worked so well, because you had that investigative and prosecutorial power right there in one team. And it's something that can happen. We're seeing the MPA developing the investigative directorate. And honestly, I honestly think, and I know it's not within my jurisdiction, justice as such, or the MPA, but I must give them credit, because over the last few months, I'm really seeing a lot of high-profile people that we never thought would be facing their day in court. That we're seeing now. People linked to state capture with regards to the Guptas, Transnet, you name it, they're starting to appear. And I think we need to give credit to that. And there's something that the management in the MPA seem to be having done right. And I think it's obviously taken long, and it's frustrating. I'm sure it frustrates them too. But if we've got that and we can do the same in the police, then surely we can start winning.
And then with the oversight and accountability part, of course, that's a responsibility of the committee. Is then the committee open to collaborating with other committees within Parliament, such as the Committee on Intelligence, to ensure that we combat the crime of extortion?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, where we are allowed to share and so on, I know, there's security clearance challenges not challenges, but requirements that you need to fit into. But with regards to working together with other committees, I think I can't emphasize it enough. It is absolutely crucial. I mean, for example, the Justice Committee, it's critical for us. From a policing sense, social development, for example, on certain kinds of issues, it's critical for us. So definitely. And I mean, within the next few months, we've got oversight visits to all the provinces worst affected by extortion, and we've now adopted the preliminary or interim report on extortion in the police committee, and it was fantastic to see it was unanimously adopted. There was not one party that objected to it. In fact, it was fantastic to see that when we wanted to adopt it, everyone raised their hands together. So it's really good to see the committee come together like that. And later on, we'll obviously bring to the table the next big report to give feedback on not only public hearing processes along with the Secretariat, but also with regards to all the other initiatives that will come out of the oversight visits that we have done.
Now, the Portfolio Committee on Police is responsible for ensuring that the executive performs its functions and fulfills its responsibilities. Take a look at what the department had to say about the underreporting of extortion cases. Stay tuned.
The challenge of extortion, which greatly affect a lot of people, is that it's underreported, and especially in construction, most of the stakeholders, they are aware that they should make provision for 30% local sourcing. But however, that is a problem because there's nobody that really look after or adjudicate as to is a specific contractor that comes into a place do as the law requires. If your tender is over 30 million, you must apportion 30% for the local, and the interpretation of the legislation in regard to that. So that on its own is a challenge. And most constructors, they go along, and when the criminals, I would say criminals, start increasing the money, then that's when they make a U-turn. And they report, only then they report to the police. And when during investigation you find that, but looks like you have been paying these people, and that's when they will deny, or they will give you half facts in terms of the statement. So those are some of the challenges that we have. And but we, in other areas like your small business, like your spaza shop, whatever, we do have some of our operations that are going in there, which I'm sure they'll reap fruits with time, without detailing how we are getting into that area. But in general, that is one of the problems. And also the fact that people are required, once the tender is out, that it be gazetted, everybody see that so-and-so got a tender of so much. That on its own, it makes the specific contractor vulnerable to these people, because they will then come out and say as to how much they're going to get to the specific contractor.
And that was the oversight meeting of the Portfolio Committee on Police held on the 10th of September 2024, where Minister Mchunu and the Police Department briefed the committee on the SAPS's plans of intervention to combat the crime of extortion in South Africa. We are still in studio with the Chairperson of the Portfolio Committee of Police, Mr. Ian Cameron, discussing this widespread issue of concern. Chair, we've spoken about the impact, we've spoken about prevalence, we've spoken about the committee's role in terms of oversight and accountability. Let's talk more about plans and the legislative framework, right? And any policies that the committee wants to commit to ensure that extortion we combat it. Now, we understand that the Portfolio Committee has now adopted a framework, right? And it will utilize this to monitor the implementation of the plans of the SAPS and the Minister's Department. Give us a brief rundown of what the framework is and what it wants to do and what it will ensure that the department will achieve.
So firstly, I think we're waiting for the outcomes that would be able to indicate whether there is success or not. Because at the moment, we're still waiting for the police to tell us. But if we've reached these targets, then it means there's a decrease. Because if I go and do oversight in, for example, Tata, and I want to determine whether extortion is being successfully combated or not, I need to be able to measure it properly. So we're still in discussion about that. But apart from that, what we are going to be looking into and what we've already started inquiring on is first of all, what is the dedicated capacity in areas where extortion really is prevalent? And has there been consultation on a local level between the relevant investigative authority and the prosecutorial authority? Have they gone and dug deep to determine how they will not unnecessarily rush the case, but fast track it, make sure that it is done with the relevant urgency? And I must go back to what the National Commissioner says, because I can't blame people for not wanting to go and report it sometimes. I also want them to report it, but people are scared because they don't know if they can trust the police. So if we don't change that, the picture from the top down needs to change in terms of being able to trust a leader with integrity, then we can't expect people to change their reporting. Apart from that, as I've said in terms of the interim report, we will also then continue to look at specifically the Eastern Cape, KZN and the Western Cape and go to the very areas where this is so prevalent. Now, the challenge that we have and that we wanted to do is obviously public hearings, but the challenge with public hearings is it exposes people in that very community and the risk of it is very high. So we've changed the format and we're planning to engage with different policing forums and community safety structures in those relevant areas and then channeling a public engagement through them and doing it virtually, along with the coordination and support with the Civilian Secretariat of the Police Service. If we do that, I think we de-risk it to the members of the public. It gives them an opportunity to speak straight. Obviously, technological barriers will be challenging, so we're going to have to see how we're going to work around that. But we're trying to do it to make sure we don't end up causing people to be killed. And again, it feels horrible to say it so casually, but that is the reality that we are facing. I think that in a nutshell. And then in the beginning of 2025, there are two very important visits to both the Eastern Cape and KZN being planned. Okay. And we've seen in KZN specifically, and I must mention this and emphasize it, I've seen some criticism regarding the way that the Provincial Commissioner in KZN has approached some of these organized crime groups. But people need to take certain things into consideration. One is that it is a province known for hostility and that a lot of organized hitmen often are hired from KZN to other parts of the country to form part of certain organized syndicates. So we cannot expect to have coffee and tea with these criminals. They're not there to play nice. They want to kill the police. They want to kill innocent people. Secondly, the use of force must be proportionate, and that's very important. If someone shoots at the police, they mustn't cry if they get shot dead in the process. And I say it bluntly and honestly, but South Africans are sick and tired of criminals being treated almost more fairly than what the actual innocent civilian is. So I must say, obviously, everything must be done within the framework of the law, and it can't be that the police are judge, jury, and literally executioner. So if there are cases that are questioned, sure thing, investigate them, but don't create the perception in public that the police are unnecessarily overstepping. I can also tell you that a lot of the prosecution success in KZN and the investigation of a lot of these syndicates didn't happen overnight. I know for a fact that the strategy and them working together with senior prosecutors in that province has been coming for a few years, and we're starting to see the results. So I must commend some of the teams in KZN for the way that they have been working, despite some of the, I think, unfair criticism that they've been receiving.
Now, of course, there have been views within Parliament that it's better to go with the route of having an ad hoc committee to specifically focus on the issue of extortion. Is the Portfolio Committee on Police confident that they are equipped and they have enough resources to ensure that they do proper oversight and hold the executive to account in terms of extortion?
Yeah, so before I get to the resources, it's important to understand that extortion links to so many other parts of the criminal underworld in South Africa. And because if you go look at, for example, reports by the Global Initiative of Transnational Organized Crime, you would see that all of these different illicit networks are somehow connected. Removing one element of it into another committee or another structure, if it's an ad hoc committee or not, makes it very difficult for us to have an integrated approach and to make sure that we do joint work with other committees and structures. It's important that we've got a joint approach and that we bring all the relevant skills and stakeholders together in investigating this and doing oversight of it. The other part is that our focus is exactly that. It is the police. Now, there are specific details that we may focus on as a priority sometimes, and extortion is one of them at the moment because it's become such a critical thing in society in South Africa. But removing it from there, I think, could cause a disjointed approach. The danger of it, I think, also is that you have the risk of it only becoming a very narrow or a close-minded kind of focus. In other words, the arguments that we were hearing or the motivations for this that we were hearing were all mainly focused on, for example, spaza shop extortion. But you can't see it only for spaza shop extortion. We must go to that spaza shop, we must understand it, but we must also understand the extortion of the gogo having to pay for her own parking, or the extortion for the Intercape bus service and how in Umtata the ophthalmology practice had to close. We need to understand the entire nexus of this criminal structure. I think we can do it. I mean, I've got no doubt in terms of the experience in the committee and the staff that we have that we are adequate for it. I think another part that is very important is that the committee has built a lot of relevant relationships with authorities that are absolutely above board. And I think what we've done so far in a very short space of time, we have had certain successes and we have had certain small breakthroughs that haven't previously necessarily been done. I mean, the fact that we have adopted a recommendation to do a skills audit for senior members of the police is something that we've never heard before. And that is thanks to the members of our committee. And I think they do fantastic work. So yes, no doubt. In terms of the resources, we have already, for extortion, spoken with Parliament and mentioned that we would like to see if we can have additional time just for extortion. So we'll always include it within the committee, but obviously more additional time would be needed. And we've already started the planning process for the relevant oversight visits. We've already written to the Secretariat. We've had the first briefing, and the first report has already been adopted in the committee long before it's even come close to being discussed in Parliament again.
Chair, any final words with regards to the committee's commitment to combating extortion, and words of encouragement also to people within our communities to report cases of extortion?
Yes, I think in terms of communities and local police officers, in fact I want to go to the police officers first. Words of encouragement to them is that we cherish them, and if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't keep on keeping on, because they give us a glimmer of hope. And I want to tell communities with that there is hope, and we are working at it. I can honestly tell you we have received record amounts of requests for assistance regarding service delivery on the ground, and even though some of it doesn't always fall within Parliament's mandate, we've really gone above and beyond as not only a committee but the committee staff team to really support and assist members of the public. So there's always hope. We've got such an opportunity to build a positive future, and I honestly do believe we can turn the tide. We are seeing successes, we just need to keep going.
Thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you.
And that was the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Police, Mr. Ian Cameron, discussing the prevalence of extortion, the committee's role in holding the executive to account and ensuring that their plans to combat extortion are implemented. Take a look at some of the questions and concerns regarding accountability and budgeting that the committee posed to the department. Stay tuned.
But as a committee, we need to understand what the measurable outcomes are. What are we aiming to? What are we working towards? What are we measuring to ensure or to be able to confirm whether we are achieving any kind of success? In terms of measurable outcomes, we need to be able to track progress, because otherwise, how do we know we are progressing, we are moving forward? So we need to be able to tell ourselves what the benchmark is. How can we hold anyone accountable to a specific success if we don't know what to or how to measure that specific success? Then in terms of the budget, obviously we want to help with regards to budget from the committee side, but we can't do that because we don't know what the budget would entail. If we don't have details for the committee to consider, there's no way of us assisting in understanding what those budget shortcomings are. I think it's crucial that we acknowledge, and it has been said in Parliament as well, that extortion must receive urgent and focused resources. And I think everyone acknowledges that, but we need the flesh on the bone to understand exactly what that would entail.
As the custodian of democracy, Parliament's role and ultimate outcome is to represent the people and ensure government by the people under the Constitution. This is achieved by exercising oversight, holding the executive to account, and improving public participation and involvement. For more information on the work of Parliament and the Portfolio Committee on Police, visit our website at www.parliament.gov.za. To stay informed about Parliament's engagements, follow, like and subscribe on all our social media networks at Parliament of RSA, and have your say by joining the conversation and sharing your views and experiences with extortion in South Africa. After all, it is your Parliament, your voice, your future. Stay tuned for the Portfolio Committee on Mineral Resources, where the Deputy Minister, Mr. Seiso Mohai, is leading the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation in Parliament today for the tabling of the 2023-24 Annual Performance Report. Thank you for watching Parliament TV. I am Tshepo Mori. Take care.